This week's edition of Bowling Evolved is brought to you by BowlingIllustrated.com and TVSRadioNetwork.com. TVS Network, for over 50 years, bringing you the best in sports broadcasting. Hello, bowling fans. This is Dustin J. Markowitz coming to you taped on location from the gem along the Colorado River, Fort Mojave, Arizona, here in the beautiful Elite Pro Shop to bring you yet another edition of your favorite bowling talk show, Bowling Evolved. Joining me, as always, is my partner in crime. He's the five-time PBA national champion, the man with the golden left hand, and the 1992 PBA national major winner, the one, the only, Eric Forkel. Eric, what's going on, buddy?
Buenos noches, senor.
Why not? Yes.
There you go. Oh, what the heck?
Mi amigo.
Muy bueno, Taco Bell. Let's go. What the hell? Okay. All right. I don't know.
The first ever bilingual Bowling Evolved show.
That's right. I think I had a few cocktails at dinner tonight. I'm feeling good. Who knows what I'm going to say?
Well, beats me. I was just sniffing airplane glue in the parking lot. But anyway, going on.
Whatever it takes to make it happen. There you go.
Well, we have a great show for you tonight. Join us a little bit later today will be the wonderful Robert Lawrence of KR Strikeforce, formerly of Brunswick, a good friend of yours and mine, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun to have him in the studio here after our first commercial break. And I got to say, one of the topics we are looking to discuss actually is going to be the relation of you and him both winning majors in 1992. Yourself, obviously, the PBA National, and him with the U.S. Open.
I love 1992. Just like I love Riverside Lanes, but I really love 1992.
Well, with that shameless plug, we'll actually get that part of the show out of the way first. I do want to say to all of our listeners, we've had a great response so far for the 2x4 tournament. We are still 5 weeks out. I've already had 8 entries come into the event, which is fantastic. The word has gone out. I also want to say a big thank you to our newest sponsor, Finley Automotive Group. Finley Automotive out of Las Vegas and Bullhead City has agreed to sponsor in this tournament. You can visit them at finleyaz.com. And Eric, you know, it's one of those things for me that now local businesses are starting to see the viability in bowling, and, you know, this could be the start of something grand. They want to see what we can do for them, and I think the exposure that they will receive through this tournament and through Tom Piquera and TVS is going to be tremendous.
Yeah, I think it's great. I'm so happy that they decided to jump on board, and who knows, we could have a nice, long-lasting relationship with them, and sky's the limit.
Very much so. Of course, they will be joining our other sponsors, including Motive Bowling, Elite Pro Shop, Desert Bowler Newspaper, which I also want to say a big thank you out there to Herb Grassel with the Desert Bowler. We will have our half-page ad going out in the Desert Bowler, as well as our new Bowling Evolved Corner, where stories from both Fred Eisenhammer and myself will be appearing in there. And this month we'll also feature the story that has been featured now in Bowling Illustrated and the California Bowling News, The Plight of Eric Forkel. And Eric, I got to say, it's kind of interesting to see you being a quasi-celebrity again in the bowling world for all the wrong reasons.
Oh, shucks. I bet you say that to all the people. But, you know, I have my opinions just like everybody else. And, you know, sometimes sometimes I rub people the wrong way, but other times people actually agree with me. So I've been around this thing a long time, and like everybody else, I have an opinion, and what I think is right or wrong, it's just my opinion, and just like everybody else. That's why we have this podcast or talk show to express what we believe, whether it's stuff that, you know, happened to me or stuff that we see that we don't think is quite right. That's the freedom of speech from this great country. that's what we get from it.
Yes, we do. And before I forget, I also do want to say a big thank you to our last sponsor, Steve Adams with Mongoose Bowling Products and RealBowlerstape.com, both from amazing companies, amazing products. But moving on, as far as opinions go, Eric, you're absolutely right. I think one of the things that has related so much to bowlers is that we've been able to speak the truth, so to speak, about some of the quote-unquote injustices happening in the bowling world. And whereas some people might veer away from a controversial topic like that, we've never veered away. We've always kind of hit these things head on. And I want to say with that also a big thank you to our fans. Last week's show was the first show that went out on the TVS radio network as well. And Eric, would you believe we are actually the second most listened to program on the TVS radio network now? I think we doubled our fans from 7 to 14.
Wow, we're really moving up there. That's pretty cool. Pretty soon we'll have like 20 or 30 people. That's great.
Oh, that makes me nervous. I can't talk in front of that many people.
I understand.
But again, as I said, thank you very much to all of our listeners and to all of our fans on Facebook. You know, this is a show by real bowlers for real bowlers has always been our catchphrase, and a show about bowling yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And without the support of all of our great listeners, none of this would be possible. So again, thank you. And, you know, I know Eric and I can be a little goofy at times, have our fun out there, but, you know, we're just two guys that really love this game or sport. That will be our first debate going back a few years, but I think that's the reason we keep going. And Eric, you know, it is very humbling to know that so many people have enjoyed what we've been able to offer.
Well, that's why we do it. Obviously, neither one of us are going to get rich from this endeavor, but it's just something we enjoy to do. And, you know, people, there's talk radio shows, talk sports shows all over the place. And who knows, hopefully one day we can have this thing where people can actually call in and we could answer questions live. That would be probably the greatest thing, to actually talk to some people and answer questions, you know, just have them stream in and we'll talk about it. That would be fun. I'd look forward to that.
Well, that is still a goal we do have. We originally were planning on doing the live shows by the end of the summer. Obviously, with the deal with TVS, our podcast future kind of changed a little bit as far as where we were going to do, and our focus has had to change. But obviously, in my opinion, Eric, and I'm pretty sure it's yours, we are going in the right direction, and I think our relationship with TVS is going to prove that in the long run.
Well, that's the hope, at least. So we'll see where it goes, and hopefully it gets us to where we want to be.
Yes.
People can call in and give an opinion or ask questions, and obviously we'll answer them to the best of our ability, and we'll actually have a little question and answer thing. That'd be great.
Yes, and that will come in the future once we get our first TV show out there. I mean, the sky's the limit. As we continue progressing forward, we are going to do as much as we can with the resources we have, and that is our hope, is that we want to make the best show we can for all of our listeners, because it does mean as much to us as it means to you to have a quality product out there. But with that being said, speaking of quality product, let's take it back a notch. Let's go into our time machine, Eric, and let's think about a year you're very familiar with, 1992. And what was the cartoon? Sherman and Peabody? Is that what it was back in the day?
Well, you know, 1992 was actually my first year full-time out on the Pro Tour. I had gone out in 91 and bowled some summer stops. Actually made a couple of TV shows, and you know, it kind of tested the waters, and I had some success. And when 1992 rolled around, a bunch of people decided they wanted to put me out there, and that's where it all started. That's where I became a full-time pro, was in 1992.
What's really interesting is that many people argue, debate about the eras of the PBA, what constituted the true PBA tour, and a lot of people point the finger at the year 1992 because obviously that was the year reactive urethane was introduced. Mark McDowell was the first one to use reactive urethane on TV, bowling with the Excalibur bowling ball. And tell me, Eric, from your perspective, what was your thoughts when you first started seeing the quote-unquote cheater balls being out on the PBA tour?
Well, the cheater balls were quite horrible in the morning, like on the fresh. I mean, nobody used them, for the most part. Those balls were fantastic at night because back then they only oiled the lanes once a day. So you'd have squad after squad would come in and bowl, and then by the time you bowled at night, they would hook early, especially on the right, and there'd be like no back end. Well, with the cheater ball would go through the front real easy, and then it would give you a lot of back end motion. So now at night, that's when the ball was at its greatest. The ball was absolutely fantastic. And honestly, I think it was better on the right than on the left because of all the traffic. And that's where the ball really came into play. It's just down the road when they started modifying the resin balls, then they started, making them roll better on the heavier oil. They calmed them down, so to speak, and now you had the full ticket. Now you had a ball you could use in the morning and then a ball at night when they broke down. But when they first came out, like I said, they were not very good in the morning, but at night they were just terrific. Usually the trick was at night was to, hang on and then come back the next day and get your wood back because you'd lose at night because they were so dry. But with those cheater balls or the Excaliburs, the bowlers would kill them at night, and then they'd come back in the morning, probably go back to their urethane stuff, and then they would bowl well, and that's what changed. Well, the rest is history. It's been that way for 20-some-odd years now, 25 years or whatever. I mean, that's where it all started. Funny thing is that ball, the Excalibur, was being used in the Western region for a couple of years prior to going out on tour. I remember guys in the late 80s throwing those bowling balls in the Western region, and nobody thought much of the ball. It was just another bowling ball. They didn't have product registration back then, so you could basically throw whatever you want in the region. But when it got to the tour and when the best players in the world started throwing it, and like I said, Mark McDowell, you said, was first, which he was. And when he threw that first ball where it jumped off the back of the lane, he threw like a triple messenger, and that's when everybody said, what the heck is that? And that's pretty much where it started. And guys were lining up out there to get the balls, and it was tough to get. It was just tough to get a hold of them. And it was a very strange time out there. But that's where it all started.
I find it really interesting, and for those of you who may or may not know, I actually had the opportunity to have the last interview with the inventor of the Excalibur, Steve Cooper, before he passed away, the owner of New Line, the inventor of the Excalibur. And I remember him telling me a little bit about when, as you mentioned, the ball was being used like in the PCB or the Pacific Coast Bowlers, the tournaments on the West Coast. Scott Cray, who owned the pro shop at La Habra 300, was actually the first one to be throwing that ball in the PCB. And you're right, from what I understand, not a lot of people took much heed on it until it started really opening up the lane, as you said, on the night squads and stuff of that nature, and it really changed the outlook. Now, asking you this question, now 1992 I find fascinating as well, because if you look at the titleists for that year, there is such a wide variety and mixture of bowlers. And as we have our guest coming on here after the first commercial break, Robert Lawrence, you and Robert obviously were two completely different styles throwing the ball. And I believe Robert actually was with Columbia at the time using nothing but urethane. Now, with your two titles in 1992, were you still using urethane, or did you start dabbling with reactive?
No, that was all urethane. The first one was a ebonite ball. I can't quite remember the name of it. It's the tip of my tongue right now. The second one was when I won the national. That was with a blue hammer. It was all urethane, and at that time I was not on staff with anyone, and it was tough to get bowling balls. You got them when you could, They had balls out there, but it was you had to get them from the ball reps, and then you had to get a comp slip, and it was quite different than the way it is in the last 10, 15 years. But when the lanes were slick, the blue hammer was the greatest ball in the world back then, and they were pretty tight in Toledo at the National, and that blue hammer came in handy, and I pretty much threw the blue hammers all week, and I threw them on the show, and I didn't sign with Hammer after that. It took me almost 2 years to get somebody to offer me a deal. And you'd think after you won a couple times out there, which I did, I won in the beginning in Erie, and then I won in Toledo about a month later. You'd think after being like the leading money winner for a while, somebody would offer you a deal, but it was very, very difficult to get on staff back then. Not quite the way it is nowadays. Back then it was way more difficult, and even when you won national titles, they didn't automatically put you on a ball staff. Actually, I used to be a close friend of mine out on tour, John Mazza. He talked to John Jowdy on my behalf in the end of '93 and said, why don't you guys sign Eric? Because I think Mazza signed with AMF, if I remember correctly. I can't quite remember. It's a long time ago. And he talked to Jowdy and said, why don't you sign Forkel? And they did. They offered me a deal, and I started with Columbia in 1994. And in like 90, so, I can think of in 99, when I went to, Storm, I'm trying to think of how it happened. In 98, I was kind of throwing a little bit of everything, to be honest with you, like a lot of guys do when you're not under contract. And I just started throwing the Storm balls, and they rolled really good, and I stayed with them. And I got offered a deal by Bill Chrisman after I made a TV show in 98. And I threw their product all week, and I threw it on the show, even though the other ball companies were offering way more money. I kept the loyalty, and I threw the Storm ball on the show. And Bill Chrisman thought that was the greatest thing because they were just getting started back then as well. And I showcased their product on TV. And later on that year, he called me back and said, I'd like to offer you a deal for $19.99. He said, I appreciate you being loyal to us this year, even though we didn't pay you. And I'd like you to be on staff starting in 1999. And I did. And that's how I was with them for almost 15 years. So it was different back then than I think it is now. Now there's a lot of guys on staff, and they get on staff a lot easier than what it used to be, in my opinion. But it's a different thing now. It's different media, different social media, different ways to show product, guys in pro shops. Back then it was way, way different. And so I've kind of seen both sides of it. But, yeah, 92 was special in a lot of ways, that's for sure.
I look forward to speaking with Robert when he comes on, definitely to get his perspective on the staff positions. And as we've talked about in the show before, one of the things we've discussed is how bowlers get noticed. And, it used to be a lot of people just think that because you can throw a ball that a staff is going to, or a company is going to automatically offer you a staff position. And what a lot of, Joe bowlers may not understand is that it's not about how well you can throw the ball necessarily. It's about how well you can sell the product you're doing. Be it you're a national staff player, be it you're someone in social media, be it you're someone that's doing ball reviews or is working in a pro shop or wherever the case is, that's what these companies are looking for. And I think it's really a shame that there's a lot of guys out there that, yes, are quote-unquote good bowlers, but they don't have enough professionalism to realize that bowling is still a business one way or another.
Oh, there's no doubt. I mean, back then, obviously, guys were the balls being used on TV back in the 80s and the 90s when bowlers would see the guys throwing the stuff on TV, they would go the next day and go to the pro shop and buy the ball. That has kind of changed. They don't, more than likely, they don't sell bowling balls on TV anymore like they used to. Back in the day, they used to, but that stopped a while ago. And it always amazes me that companies still have staff bowlers, still have staffs. They use them for other things, but back then, when your ball got on TV, it was a thing to get your ball on TV because it really did sell product, and that's why companies would try to get the best players on their staff. And God, at one point, Columbia had a really big staff, and then Brunswick had a really big staff, and Storm came on down the road. Then they started getting bigger and bigger, but back in those days, it was really Brunswick and Columbia were the two big guns. AMF wasn't too bad either, but it was mostly them. And Ebonite, of course, can't forget Ebonite. So that's how it was back at that time. And certain guys, like Parker, he's been with Brunswick for, 20, 30 years. I mean, certain guys have never left. Jason was with Ebonite forever, and certain guys just never leave. But then there's other guys who kind of jump around. Funny, like Walter Ray, he's been all over the place, but now he's back with Brunswick, even at this point in his career. So it just depends. Everybody makes a pretty good product. It's just certain bowlers seem to bowl a little bit better with certain products. But as you know, everybody makes good bowling balls. It's just a question, some are just a little bit different than others, I feel, and some are a little more special. And certain companies cover a wide variety of all different ball motions, and that's one of the good things. Right now I'm with Brunswick, and man, their stuff is terrific all the way from the beginning, from the low end stuff to the high end, and with all three brands, Radical and DV8, they got everything covered. So,
yes.
If you happen to be fortunate enough to work for somebody like that, you got it made. And especially when you get older, because you don't say bowl for a living as much anymore. And it's nice to have someone still want to have you on staff because they still value having you on staff, even though you're, in the later part of your career.
Well, I've been very fortunate in my career to represent 3 different staffs. I was with EBI's Hammer brand. I was with Motive for Hammer for 2 years, Motive for 4 years, and then Brunswick for 2 years. And of course, also with having the Mongoose, of course, with supports, not bowling balls, but being involved with other companies. And you mentioned TV coverage, and I think that's what's really interesting is that back in the day, you're right. The TV coverage was the PR. You saw it on TV, you went to the pro shop and you bought it. But now, I think TV, although it's still important, now people see it on TV and they go to the internet to research it, and that's when they see the staffers with their ball reviews and talking about the product, and that's why social media has gone so important these days as well.
Yeah, that's basically taken the place. That's why, it's been a good 10, 15 years, I think, that TV has sold bowling balls, to be honest with you. It's been a long time. You got to go back into the 90s to find a place where bowling balls actually sold when they saw the pros throw it on TV. You start getting into the 2000s, the late 2000s, and I think that the period was over. Now it's all about pro shops, social media, and getting using that venue. That's just the way it is. That's where it has gone to now, and that's why, just like you said, that's what sells product now. It's that grassroots. It's not because the bowling's not live anymore. It's not, it's not weekly like it was back in the day when it was 16 weeks in a row on ABC, the lead-in for Wild World of Sports, and then on ESPN at night. People don't know where bowling is nowadays. It's all over the place. Nobody never knows when it's on. Is it taped? It's probably going to be on in a month from now. There's no, it's just not the way it was. It's just simple. And
I think that's why Motive, for example, with sponsoring our tournament, they see the viability of, they're going to get the exposure from the TV to get the interest, but then, of course, we back it up with our print and obviously our social media presence. And I think a lot of the companies, Inside Bowling, Mike Flanagan with his relationship with Storm at the time, is kind of the same thing. When these companies see that you're attacking the consumer from multiple angles, including arguably the most important being social media, that's where the viability is. It's not just being on one outlet anymore. It's being able to be on multiple outlets.
No, and that's how it has changed. That's why when you bring up, say, a year like 1992, that's my first year on tour. I happened to win along with Robert, and it's just, you can remember back then, and then you look at it now, and it's really changed 100 degrees. It's 180 degrees difference. It's not even close. It's amazing. It's just hard to believe it's even the same thing because it's just so completely different than what it was back then. But, everything changes. Nothing stays the same. And you just got to do what you can to try to stay in the game, even at a later part of your career.
Very well said. And on that note, we are going to be closing in on our first break. Eric is going to be leaving the studio for just a few minutes as the one and only Robert Lawrence, the 1992 U.S. Open champion, will be joining us. Stick around, fans. When we come back, Robert Lawrence. This week's edition of Bowling Evolved is brought to you by BowlingIllustrated.com and TVSRadioNetwork.com. TVS Network, for over 50 years, bringing you the best in sports broadcasting. Welcome back, bowling fans. Well, Eric has stepped out for a little bit to allow our guests to come in. And speaking of 1992, this should be a special treat for all of our listeners. He is the 1992 U.S. Open champion. He is the representative for KR Bowling Bags and Equipment. And, of course, most importantly to me, he is a man that I have been friends with now for well over a decade and gave me my first chance with a ball company when I started bowling for Brunswick back in 2006. He's the one, the only, Rob Law, Robert Lawrence, coming back on the show. Robert, how you doing tonight, buddy?
Doing good, Dustin. Doing good.
Very glad to hear it. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And, I think it's so interesting that both you and Eric had so much success in 1992. And like Eric and I were talking about a little earlier with the introduction of reactive resin that year and how the tour started to change at that point. You were right in the middle of that. And tell us, what's the memories you have of that year and that year out on tour for you?
Actually, it was an interesting year because earlier in the season, I had the bowl. I led the Sacramento tournament, and had to bowl Mike. It was me and four lefties on the show, and I had to bowl Mike Scroggins, who I was rooming with at the time. And not only did he beat me, but when he beat me, he bumped me out of the Firestone Tournament of Champions because I was on the bubble. So I had to win to get back into that, and it just so happened that 2 weeks before the Tournament of Champions was the U.S. Open, and I was fortunate enough to win that tournament, and it got me right back in 2 weeks later into the Tournament of Champions. But I also remember, the resin balls had come out, and so it was really starting to become a little more hit and miss for me. I was not matching up to the lane conditions every week. There were weeks, before resin, you could kind of grind out a check if you were bowling good or something. You could kind of figure something out a lot of the times. But with resin, it kind of became cut and dry. Either was going to like what I saw or not like what I saw. There wasn't a lot of in between. So, but when I won the U.S. Open, even with resin balls out there, I won using a Columbia Black UDOT urethane. So the lanes were tough enough, scores were low enough, and so the UDOT, still there was no benefit of resin really when you came to that tournament. So that's what I remember the most. It went on to be a pretty decent year. It was my second best year in earnings. So, and I was still healthy at the time. So looking back now, I'm like, boy, it sure was fun to bowl without any injuries. So, yeah, but that's what I remember, winning with urethane after resin came out and, winning just 2 weeks before the Tournament of Champions and getting right back in it. So, yep, that was it.
Very interesting. Let me ask you this, too. Now, when you first saw the Excalibur, which, of course, was the first reactive urethane ball out there, and Mark McDowell won with it, I can't remember the tournament offhand, but when you first saw that ball out on the lanes, what was your first impression of seeing reactive urethane?
Well, I can't remember exactly. I just remember that show, and it was at the AC Delco tournament out in Torrance, California, because that's how we kicked off every year. The first 2 or 3 years I was out there, we kicked off each year out there. So I remember it very well. And I remember him mowing them down on TV with that ball. And what stood out to me the most was not necessarily watching guys that didn't normally hook it more, but it was the pin action. It was the action, the pins being thrown around more on off hits. And to this day, I still say that's the biggest difference is the off hits. They don't always give you more of the lane. They don't always give you more margin of error, but they give you those off hits. But that's where it all started. I remember, I guess it was later in that year. I really, it's hard for me to remember exactly the timeline of it all, but I do remember crossing with my buddy and roommate at the time, Bill Oakes, at the Touring Players Championship. And we're on the same pair together, which didn't happen very often. And I hooked the ball a lot, and Bill threw the ball pretty hard and straight. And we're both out of the cut, not going to make a check. And so we're not really playing around or goofing around, but Bill is left of me hooking the ball probably an arrow more than I am and laughing at me. And I'm just shaking my head because at the time I was with Columbia, on Team Columbia. We didn't have anything like that. And here's this guy that throws knuckleballs hard and straight out hooking me by an arrow. And so I do remember that a lot.
That's great. That's a great story. And it's really fascinating to hear the perspective of the guys that are out there that saw the change. As Eric and I were talking about a little bit earlier, myself growing up, obviously at that point I was still very young, but watching the tour and growing up with it, was not able to grasp just the sheer magnitude of what the equipment did. And speaking of equipment, moving on a little bit further in your career, obviously you had a very good run out on tour, and then most people do know you as the former Brunswick rep for a long time. That's how we first met. And Tell us a little bit about your time with Brunswick. How did that come about, and what ended up moving you from the Brunswick bowling balls to the KR department?
Well, it came about, actually, it was 13 years ago, because I was with Brunswick for 12 years until 1 year ago, September. But it came about because Brunswick was struggling at the time, back in 2003, and they invited 10 of the top shops from around the country to come up to Muskegon, Michigan, so that they could do a little round table for a couple days, basically pick our brains. You know, why are we so successful, and why is Brunswick not being, having any success? So that's kind of how it went. I was invited up for that. About a year later, they invited they invited 10 of us. So a year later, they invited 5 of us back and 5 new guys. And I got invited back the second year because they liked how involved I was, a lot of input. Some guys showed up and it was like a vacation to them. I actually had a lot of negative things to say to them and a lot of constructive criticism. So I got invited back. And when I went back the second year, my Brunswick rep at the time, Billy Yinger, kind of told me the second day off to the side that it looked like he was going to be leaving to go to Dynathane at the time. And so I was like, I encouraged him, well, good for you and blah, blah, blah. And then about 2 weeks later, he calls me and said, hey, I made the move to Dynathane, and my boss, Tony, at Brunswick, wants to know if you'd be interested in the Brunswick job that I'm vacating. And he told me what all was involved, and I thought, man, that sounds like, at the time I owned a pro shop that was doing very well, but it was just something I couldn't pass up, so I accepted it. Luckily got the job and was there for 12 years until 1 year ago. And so what has happened now then, KR Strikeforce had been a partner of Brunswick for 23 years, making all their bags and accessories, and for the last 3 years, their shoes. And Brunswick wanted to go out on their own, make their own bags, make their own accessories and shoes. That was the decision they had made. So that partnership with KR was going to break up at the end of this year. At the end of December of 2016, that partnership is over with. So at the time a year ago, Tony Mendiola, who had hired me at Brunswick 12 years prior, had been at KR for about 6 years. And he came to me and he said, Robert, this split up looks like it's going to happen. When they first started talking about it, he goes, would you be interested in coming to our side? Because we're going to need someone out in the Southwest and out West. And I said, absolutely. I really didn't feel like I was fitting in as much at Brunswick like I had been. The team that was there when I took the job was slowly or quickly or however you want to look at it, was dissolving. There was only a couple of us left on the team out of, if it's 12, 15 people, there was only 2 or 3 of us left from that original team. And little by little, guys were leaving or for one reason or another. So I decided to go. And then when they made it official that the split up was for sure going to happen, they announced that last year, I decided to take my chances and tell Brunswick goodbye and go over to the Strikeforce team. And turns out for me, it was a great move for me on my part. So, couldn't be happier now. And of course, at the same time that this was all going on, we kind of knew this was going to happen, but we didn't tell the public yet for a few more months. But with the Brunswick thing going away, we signed an 8-year deal with Ebonite to make all the Ebonite bags and accessories. So we now make Ebonite, Track, Hammer, and Columbia bags. We make all their accessories. We have the Robbie's brand. We have the Powerhouse products. And that's an 8-year deal. So that was a great deal. So this year's been kind of crazy. Brunswick exiting, which we still have all their products. Now Brunswick has some of their own products, so it's a little confusing out there. And also during all this, about 5 months ago, we purchased Linz. So we took over the Linz brand that's been around for almost 100 years. And just to be brief with that, when people think of Linz, they think of the Linz Classics bowling shoes after all these years. but we really purchased Lynn's to take over their rental shoe and house ball business. It gives us an in with bowling centers. So now we have Pro Shop products. Now we have bowling center products. It just makes us a more solid company all around. So we got a lot on our plate. This year has been a crazy year, and I knew what I was getting into, and I signed up for it. And it's been crazy but wonderful. So that's where we're at.
Well, it definitely sounds like you're happy. And I must say, Robert, and obviously, again, we've known each other for a long time, but I say this from the bottom of my heart, you are without a doubt one of the nicest and friendliest people I've ever met in the bowling industry. And I know there's thousands of people that feel the same way about you. So your happiness makes me happy.
I appreciate that. One thing whenever I was bowling it, I started at the bottom when I had nothing, and then I started to have the success on the tour, and a lot of times that breeds a different type of an ego or a different type of an attitude, and it was all, my goal was to just not change, just be the same person I felt like I always was. I was fortunate enough to grow up with a dad that was very popular. Everyone loved my dad, and I got to see how he did things right in the bowling business. And, when he passed away, he didn't have any enemies. And I kind of made that promise to myself. I said, when I go, man, I don't want to have any enemies. So I guess it's working, a little bit.
Most definitely. And again, when we had originally announced you'd be on the show a few weeks ago, and obviously we had some scheduling conflict there, but there was a lot of positive feedback, and I'm so glad to have you back on now. And I do want to ask you, speaking of the KR products and things coming out, I know we had a chance to kind of touch base on the different brands associated with KR and the future, but let's talk a little bit about, for example, the shoe line. I know one thing you and I were talking about off the air was about the Raptor shoe that is coming out and how exciting that was for me to look at something in that price range. Tell the audience a little bit about that and about what KR and Strikeforce are trying to do.
Okay. Well, obviously we had the Brunswick line of shoes, and we started off for the first couple of years with just athletic shoes, which is what we call just the recreational type shoes. And then 2 years ago, into our fourth year of shoes, we decided to come up with a performance shoe, and we made the Brunswick TPUX and the Stealth with interchangeable soles. The TPUX shoes were extremely well received. The first year we had some toe tip problems, then we addressed that and got that fixed. And so we knew that was a great shoe. When this split up was going to happen, we know the Brunswicks were going to go away. So we changed all of our athletic shoes over to Strikeforce, the Strikeforce brand of shoes. And with that, we created a new performance shoe for men and women, the men's being the Raptor, the women's being the Star. Along those lines we also worked with Ebonite to create a hammer shoe for men and women. And the hammer is the Force, and the women's is the Vixen. But with the Force, we used the design of the TPUX, which was our patent, and we created the Hammer Force shoe. Basically, it is like the TPUX, but it's the traditional black and orange look that you get from Hammer, and they've been extremely well received. But the great thing about the others, the Raptor and the Star by Strikeforce and the women's Vixen by Hammer, is that it's a performance shoe with an interchangeable sole on the left foot. So they're made for right-handers only, and I apologize to any left-handers out there, but this is the first year.
I can hear Eric grumbling already.
Hey, you can buy the Hammer Force shoes. The Hammer Force shoes are for everyone. But with the Raptor and the Vixen and Star, you get a changeable pad on the slide foot, and it comes with one slide sole and one heel. And because it only comes with the one on each, we were able to keep the price down to where the consumer can buy a performance shoe with changeable soles for around $100. Now, if there's another sole or a heel they need, they can purchase those. And the price still keeps it below what you would normally see out of a performance shoe. No one has a changeable sole shoe at that price point.
absolutely incredible. And I know already, at least in our local pro shop, people have been talking about going wild because for most of your recreational and even beginning league bowlers that want to start making the jump into being more competitive, price point is a big deal to anybody. And you know as well as I do that not everyone has $1,000 to fork out for equipment. So having a chance to get into a performance shoe for $100 is absolutely incredible. I think it's tremendous what you guys are doing.
I appreciate that, and that's what's important is anybody that really wants, unless you're a shuffler with your feet and you like a slide pad on both feet, anyone that really wants to bring their game to the next level and continuing to improve needs to have a traction foot on their non-slide shoe. So this gets a shoe on your foot with a traction sole on one foot and then changeable slide pads on the other. And it's extremely important, but you're able to do it for $100, which is a good $60, $70, $80 or more less than some of your top performance shoes from other brands or even from our Hammer Force shoe.
Yes. Now, is the heel interchangeable as well on the Raptor?
On the slide foot, yes. Yep.
Yes. Excellent. Because I know a lot of us with bad knees, we all like that carpeted heel to be able to give ourselves a little bit more balance when we use the full foot to slide. So I think that's a great asset. Now, obviously, people can go to their local pro shops, inquire about these products, but what is the website for people to go online and check out the products themselves?
It's krstrikeforce.com. When you go to that website, there's going to be a bar across the top, a menu bar, and you'll see the KR products, and then you're going to see all the Columbia 300, Hammer, Track, Ebonite, all the brands that we have that we carry are on that website. So you can find those, the KR shoes under KR Strike Force, or you can find the Hammer Force and Vixen shoes under Hammer.
Well, you heard it here first. Check out the website. Check out the shoes. Some incredible products there. Now, Robert, we got to go into another break here momentarily, but before we let you go, I do have one final question. When people had heard, our fans, obviously our wonderful fans out there, heard you're going to be coming on, one of the topics that had come up was because you were in charge of the staffers for so long when you were at Brunswick, obviously you were in charge of myself and several others. One question that gets brought up a lot is how someone gets recognized to join the staff. And in your opinion, obviously people have changed the outlook. It used to be, if you got on TV or you're able to throw a ball, but there seems to be so much more that goes into becoming a staffer. In your opinion, what makes a person qualified to join, be a Brunswick staff or a Hammer staff or whatever the case is?
Yeah, well, we have a checklist, or at least when I was at Brunswick, we kind of had a checklist over the important things of what a bowler can bring to the company. And with that being said, number one priority is what is going to help us sell product. What is going to move, as a bowling ball company, what is going to move more bowling balls out in the bowling world than anything out of this bowler? What's he going to do? And number one on that list is, do they work for a pro shop or do they own a pro shop? Are they affiliated in any way with a pro shop? Because especially if it's a good pro shop, there's no better way to move product than be the guy in that shop and with say when I was with Brunswick, they got a large display of Brunswick products. They're going to push the customer to those products first. If the customer doesn't come in specifically asking for another brand, you're going to lead them to your product. So that's the number one priority. Now, none of them are set in stone. You're going to have, guys that are out bowling all over the country or some guys over the world. How much bowling are you going to be doing? So somewhere in there, in those checklists, owns a pro shop, does a lot of bowling. He's on Facebook a lot. He's on social media a lot. All these things really help. But just being a good bowler, Johnny League bowler in 2 leagues or bowling a few regionals here and there, just being a really good bowler is not really what a ball company's looking for. They're looking for someone that can move the needle. And the easiest way to move the needle is to be affiliated with a pro shop, or you're traveling bowling, 30 or 40 tournaments a year. It was tough. That was one of the toughest parts of the job, was having to tell people no. Couldn't get you on the staff. And then, of course, having to listen to guys complain about I didn't get on staff, but this guy over here, so many times I heard him complain about this other guy being on staff. Well, what they didn't realize was this guy worked for a shop that was doing a couple $100,000 a year, moving a lot of product. We wanted most of that product to be ours at Brunswick. So, I mean, there's a lot of sometimes nasty comments made and hateful or hurtful comments being made about other staffers or not being on, or, not getting chosen to be on staff. But it really is, all about selling bowling balls.
Yeah. And you heard it here first, folks. We had on not too long ago, one of the biggest reasons I bring this up, we actually had discussed this several months ago, and one of the things I talked about, and I actually had wrote about this, was, there's a lot of guys out there that can throw a bowling ball, but as you said, it's about what can move product. I look at guys that work in the industry, be in a pro shop, or, again, as you said, have great social media presence, and I would definitely say to people out there that want to get on staff, do some ball reviews, do some write-ups. If you're able to do something in the media side of the industry, in the pro shop side of the industry, something you can do to get your name out there, I think that's what will attract someone who used to be in your position, of course, or whoever is in the position as of today. That's what's going to attract them. And Robert, it seems like you just pretty much clarified that for any of the Johnny-come-latelys out there that want to get on a staff.
Yeah. Yep. And with that being said, you got to be professional. You have to have a great attitude, and you have to be outgoing. You have to be, wanting to talk to people at tournaments and not be one of those guys like in your own little clique with your 5 or 6 buddies and don't bother me, or someone comes and asks for some advice. Excuse me. You have to be willing, to work with those people and be open about it.
Well, Robert, I definitely appreciate your candor, and I'm sure our listeners do as well. Ladies and gentlemen, stick around. When we come back, Eric will be stepping back in the studio. And I do want to say once again, we've been interviewing the one and only, the great, fantastic, phenomenal. I don't have enough words to describe you, buddy. I think that's about all I can do for right now. my friend, Robert Lawrence. Once again, Robert, thank you for joining the show tonight.
Thank you so much for having me.
Ladies and gentlemen, stick around. When we come back, more from Bowling Evolved right after this. This week's edition of Bowling Evolved is brought to you by BowlingIllustrated.com and TVSRadioNetwork.com. TVS Network, for over 50 years, bringing you the best in sports broadcasting. Welcome back, bowling fans. Well, Robert has left the studio, and Eric has rejoined us. And, Eric, I got to say, it's always great to have Robert Lawrence on the show. I mean, as I said before, he is truly one of the nice guys in the bowling industry, and I can't think of too many people that have anything bad to say about Mr. Lawrence.
No, Robert's great. He's been great as long as I've known him back in the early 90s, and it's always fun to talk to him. And he's got as many, if not more, stories than I do because he was out there at that time as well. So I'm sure everyone will enjoy what he had to say. I know I did.
And it is fantastic, and I've always feel so blessed because having friends like him, like you, people that I've known for years now, and to be able to just share stories and laugh. I think the camaraderie of bowling is what keeps bringing me back to it, and maybe that's why we keep doing the show. Maybe we just like each other's company. I don't know. It's kind of weird, but
probably not, but that's okay.
Oh, come on.
Of course. You're like the little puppy I always wanted. I don't know. What can I tell you?
You're my second dad. Let's leave it at that.
There you go. That just makes me old again, and back to being old. I just turned 56. Yeah. Thanks. Great. Lucky me.
Yeah. Well, you are the same age as my dad, actually.
Exactly. See? That's why.
Wonderful. But, Eric, you are not too old because I do want to bring up another topic that I was just brought aware of today, and I think our fans would be very excited to hear this, that you, sir, are going to be bowling a couple national stops here in the next few weeks.
Yeah, some crazy things happen, and you get a phone call here and there, and I was asked to bowl in the team event, the PBA team tournament here in Vegas at the at the Plaza at South Point. And I said, sure, why not? I'll take my shot against all the young guns. And then they've got the other tournament there over the weekend, the Fall Classic tournament, which is singles, of course. And a good friend of mine said, why don't you bowl that too? I said, well, you know, it's not the senior tour, it's the young guys tour, and you know, this old guy doesn't bowl like the young kids anymore, but they kind of talked me into it, so I'm going to take a shot at it. Hopefully I won't embarrass myself, and you never know, I might sneak a check from these people. That would be kind of cool. That'd be awesome.
Well, you know what they say, you know, heroes get remembered, but legends never die. And as far as I'm concerned, Eric, I mean, you are still Eric Forkel. No one's ever going to take that away from you, and I think you might surprise some of these young guns out there. I mean, you did make the finals of the 2015 U.S. Open, and you know, runner-up to the great Pete Weber, and obviously you can still throw a ball. So I don't know. I think you have just as good a shot as anybody, especially in your backyard.
Well, I mean, that was on the senior tour, and I personally think that the senior tour is a different thing than the regular tour. The game is played a little differently because of the way they dress the lanes, and obviously the two-handers are all over the place on the regular tour, and the rev rates and the speed, and the senior tour fortunately is not quite like that. Although the talent on the senior tour is all Hall of Famers, so you never know. You know, I'm gonna start getting some games in. I got about 3 weeks to try to get myself up to speed. It's a lot of games for this old guy over a course of 4 days, so I'm gonna have to get some legwork in and try to make a decent showing. And again, it's not like bowling a local 5-gamer. It's bowling against some of obviously the best bowlers in the country, and it should be interesting. But I'm fortunate to get the opportunity, and it came out of nowhere, and I'm going to take a shot at it, and we'll see what happens.
Well, you're not the first guy in his 50s to have an opportunity to get on TV on the PBA. I mean, I'm thinking of Schlegel, I'm thinking of Handegard, I'm thinking of Gary Dickerson, and, I mean, Walter Ray winning the Masters at 50, Pete Weber winning the U.S. Open at 50. I mean, there's a lot of guys who were able to do it, and, Eric, as far as I'm concerned, you are still one of the greatest left-handers in PBA Tour history. You throw one of the most consistent balls of all time, and I know there's 1,500-plus fans on our Facebook page that all think the same thing, that you're going to go out there and make us all proud.
Well, I appreciate that, and I will do my best. And like I said, I'll drink a little extra Geritol and do a couple extra sit-ups, and I'm gonna really start trying. I got to get in shape. It's not like bowling league every week, or just it's like the real deal. I got to pretend that it's I'm going to be bowling a little more serious. I gotta break down and start working out a little bit. Can't just take it easy and just go to work every day.
Remember, you got to put a little extra Gresham formula in the mustache, so they really it darkens up, so they don't know the age. You got to think this is.
Oh, don't worry, it'll be.
Derek Forkel going out there.
Don't worry, Just for Men will be in play. Don't you worry. I ain't gonna look like. I may bowl like an old guy, but I ain't gonna look like an old guy. That I can guarantee. My wife wouldn't let me. She won't let me look like an old guy. I may bowl like an old guy, but I sure as hell am not going to look like one. That's for sure. I'll let Amlevel and Weber keep their hair nice and gray, not me. Oh no. No. That brings back to a funny story.
Okay.
Mention that. I got a funny story. Years ago, when I was rooming with Ozio, the great David Ozio, of course. And when he was in the business, when he was bowling for a living and a Hall of Famer and working for Dexter, he would always go home every 3 or 4 weeks. And when he'd come back, his hair was always darker. And I mean, sometimes it was like jet black. And I'm like, what are you doing? He says, I can't let them see my gray hair. I'm as white as I says, all right. He would be completely white. So he would go home and he'd get it done and he'd come back and his hair was jet black. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. I said, you're almost 50 years old, and your hair is blacker than a 20-year-old. So when he finally retired, and then he was done, and then he's completely out of bowling now. He doesn't work. He's a fishing guide on Lake Fork and back in Texas, and it's his dream job. He's always wanted to fish for a living, and that's what he does. And if you go online and you look up he's got his own, what does he do? He takes people out on the boat. It's his own,
He's got tours. Yeah, he does tours now out there.
Yeah, I can't think of the name. He's a guide. He's a fishing guide. He's got his own. He's got his own thing. Anyway, when you look at his picture, his hair is white as the driven snow. I mean, he just turned 60. He's either 60 or 61. But I mean, his hair now is just as white as Moses can be, and it just makes me laugh because he's been that way for a long time. But when he would go home off tour, he said, I can't let people see me with my, I said, all right, whatever. And he'd get it all done. And he'd come back. I'm like, oh, you just dropped 15 years when you went home. You just got 15 years younger. He said, I gotta do that. But now he don't care because he's out guiding on a lake and his hair is as white can be. And it's just kind of funny. And I remember talking to him about that a few years back and he goes, yeah, it doesn't matter anymore. I'm not in the public eye, meaning I'm on TV. I'm not trying to sell sponsors or whatever. He says, I'm just enjoying life now and I don't have to worry about that. I said, well, good for you. I said, you finally let it go. It's just kind of funny. That's all.
You know what you should do, Eric? I just figured it out. You know what you should do, and this would be the intimidation factor for the young guys? You go
shave
out.
It completely?
No. Even better.
Oh.
You go buy the William Shatner hairpiece.
Oh, there you go. Just put a hairpiece on. There you go. I know. I've seen plenty. You know what? I've seen plenty of rugs out there, and I ain't doing a rug. I've seen a lot of bad ones. I haven't seen very many good rugs, to be honest with you. I've seen all kinds of things, and this rug is not happening. I will be a dome. Once a dome, always a dome. I remember Larry Lichtenstein used to come up to me and he used to stick his head next to mine. He goes, "Look, we're a couple of dome brothers." I said, "That's right, Lich. I'm not covering this thing. I ain't doing nothing." I used to see all kinds of things out there, and no, guys would another good bowler out there, Tim Chris. Tim Chris never had any hair. He was as bald as me. And all of a sudden he comes back for the winter tour and he's got a full head of hair. It's like, whoa, what happened? Time out. and it just didn't look like, they say his nickname used to be the Turtle. That's what they used to call Tim Chris because he threw the ball so slow. He's a good player, 1, 3, 4, 5 times, whatever he did, but he came back with a toupee. And it just looked odd because of all the years of him not having it. So, no, that's not happening.
Wait. I'll make you a deal,
I'm happy.
Eric. If you make the TV show, show, listen, on either of the programs, either the team event or the regular, if you make the show, I am going to buy you a Halloween wig, and you have to take at least one picture with it for our audience. Does that sound like a deal?
I could take one picture, but I would not wear it on TV. But I will take one picture.
No, not on TV. I mean after work.
No, I would do that. Yes, I could do that. But I'm just trying to get a check. Now you're talking about TV, but we'll see. Like I said,
well, I'm motivating you.
Oh, yes, you are. Yeah, I get it. I've seen all kinds of things. Talking about guys on TV. I remember many years ago there was a senior stop. This is before I was a senior. A guy made a TV show on the senior tour, and he was throwing a hammer ball on TV. And what he did was he had the Hammer logo put on his forehead or in his scalp, and he was bald, a senior player, and they put Hammer on his head, and he had the logo of the Hammer. They put it on with like a stencil, and as the show kept, he won like a couple of matches, but because of the hot lights on the show, by the middle of the show, you couldn't read it anymore because he was sweating and the Hammer stuff was dripping on it. It was the oddest thing I'd ever seen, and I can't remember the player's name, but it obviously was back in the 90s. But he put the logo on his scalp, on his forehead, and it either said Hammer or Nothing Hits Harder or something like that. I just remember it running down his face, and they were talking about it, and I remember I'm like, oh, that's just craziness. So I've seen some strange things, that's for sure.
maybe Brunswick will offer like a $5,000 incentive to get a bee not tattooed, but stenciled on your head during the telecast. Oh God,
that would be a big. That's enough. Well, $5,000. You never know. It depends. $5,000 not bad. That's a good starting point. But I've seen some strange things through the years. But I do remember that, and I can't remember how he did it. I just remember it was a mess from the hot lights, and because, you know, the TV show, it's warm down there, and if you start sweating from whatever, it was horrible. It started off really cool, like, hey, that looks really cool. But then about a half a game into it, it looked awful. And even the commentators were talking about that, and yeah, it was not a pretty sight by the time the thing was over. But anyway, the bottom line is I've got about 3 weeks to get ready, and I'll get started tomorrow, and I'll try to make a decent showing. That's for sure. I'll try not to be too awful.
Well, we certainly wish you our best, and obviously you have the support of myself and all of our fans, and that's going to take us into the end of the show. I want to thank everyone once again for tuning in, and before I forget, I do want to wish a very happy belated birthday to your daughter, Erica Forkel, who happens to tune into the show once in a while. Happy birthday, Erica, who I believe just turned the same age as me now. We're old together.
Oh my God, she just turned 30.
Yeah.
30. Wow.
Me and I are officially over the hill. So when we hit your age,
boy.
God, I don't even want to think about that.
Exactly. That's my point. I don't want to. I said to her, I said, Erica, what are you going to do when you're 56 and be old like me? She goes, you're not old. You're only old when you get to 65. So I've got 9 more years before I'm old.
Hey, and by that point, you can bowl the West Coast Seniors again.
I doubt it, because by the time I turn 60, they'll move it to 65.
More than likely, that's true. But
oh my Lord, yeah, that's true. Because I'm going to send Dick Sanders a note. 4 more years, I'll be knocking at the door, and you'll move it to 65. Oh my gosh. Anyway,
on that note, once again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in. Again, a big thank you to all of our sponsors. Findlay Motor Company at FindlayAZ.com. Man, you know what, Eric? The more sponsors you get, this is going to take longer and longer. But let me try if I can get through this on one breath.
That's okay.
Findlay Motor Company at FindlayAZ.com. Real Bowlers Tape and Mongoose Bowling Products. MongooseProducts.com. RealBowlersTape.com. Of course, Elite Pro Shop at EliteProShopAZ.com. Moda Bowling at ModaBowling.com. Desert Bowler on Facebook. Just search for Desert Bowler. And, of course, everyone. I almost got through one breath. Check out our Facebook and our main website at www.bowlingevolved.com. And, of course, to see all the action, please check out the TBS Television Network, TBSRadioNetwork.com, and all of the other associated TBS programming. But for my partner, Eric Forkel, I've been Dustin J. Markowitz. I need oxygen, and have a good night.
Good.